Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar this morning. My name is Jim Patterson with EPM Live, and today's installment of our webinar series has a topic about do you want more out of your SharePoint environment? And then following on with that, we're going to talk about how to extend to get more out of your SharePoint environment, and really talk about what we're doing to do that as an organization to bring comprehensive IT, PC, or IT planning and control for the infrastructure and the management of projects, products, and services within your organization. So we're going to talk about some general concepts and then specifically some of the things that can be done to extend your use of SharePoint. For those of you on the line, this is going to be a presentation or a webinar where the audience is muted. There is a chat or Q&A panel in your console for GoToWebinar. If we have folks that are monitoring those questions that can answer them for you as you go along, or possibly ones that can be saved up for the end and we'll get back to you with specific answers. So the topics we're going to cover today as part of this webinar is some of the common uses of SharePoint, talk about some of the SharePoint deployment best practices based upon experience that we've had of people actually deploying SharePoint and going through an evolution within their organization. We'll make some recommendations based upon some lessons learned and things that should be considered when we're actually doing SharePoint deployments. And then we'll also then really get into the nuts and bolts of really leveraging SharePoint for more than what most people are using it for today, and really using it for IT planning and control for all different types of work, whether they be traditional projects, more product development, application management development, or services management. So let's first talk about some of the common uses of SharePoint. For those of you on the line who are experienced and have some interaction with SharePoint over the life cycle and evolution of that technology, some of this may be elemental. But SharePoint started very early in the 2000s and has really evolved in its capabilities over time. But even with the different versions from early on in 2002 all the way through today with the 2010 version of SharePoint, some things seem to be fairly consistent. SharePoint has grown very quickly in the marketplace, almost grown like a weed, mostly because there is a free version available. It makes it easy for people to start. The current version of that, or a tier of SharePoint called SharePoint Foundation, is available on your Windows server, and it's very easy to enable and make available for your constituencies or your internal customers to start using the SharePoint technology. Because of that, SharePoint has become, I believe at this point, the fastest growing product in Microsoft's history from launch to amount of adoption out there in the marketplace. And the free version of the SharePoint Foundation used to be called, in earlier versions, a different name. But the idea is that it makes it easy for people to get in, start dabbling, and start seeing the power, value, and potential of SharePoint. Meaning that users can go in once they have access to a SharePoint instance, can freely add sites and workspaces, what typically happens. So people want to go in and put a team site together, they want to put a workspace in to collaborate with others, or just to play around with and do some things and store things of their own. Very easy for them to do that if they are given the rights and permissions to do so. Hence, it starts to grow very organically and sometimes rapidly through an organization. Typically, though, where people are starting is they end up using it for basically an alternate form or a more robust form of document storage and collaboration. For example, people start taking documents off of their desktops or their computers, local computers, or off of file shares and start uploading that data into SharePoint document libraries, to have things like version control and check-in and check-out capability and a central repository for that information that makes that available. Common use of what's done, but then it's really being used essentially as a glorified file share for what's going on. Oftentimes people will then start using some basic collaboration, getting people invited to different sites and having access to those documents so that people can both view and participate in those documents very easily. But that seems to be where a lot of people start. The nice part about that is it's an alternative to emailing documents around and other ways that people are sharing those today. A couple things there is you get many copies of the same file around, so there's not really one version of the news that you can count on or know that you have the latest and greatest. Also, just the storage implications of sizable documents with a lot of graphic files, etc., can easily use up storage and unnecessarily fill up your capacity for your storage for that type of documentation. The use of team sites then really starts to get invoked. People easily build team sites for departments or business units or people who are building teams for a specific general effort or purpose or initiative that they're going on. And in addition to sharing documents that are germane to that team or to that initiative, people start collaborating on things like list items, things like issues and action items and other things like that. Use it as a forum to communicate things like announcements and other things like that. So general collaboration, or even leverage things like basic discussion areas or discussion threads. Those things are common things that are used within the core capabilities of SharePoint. And it's really low-hanging fruit because a lot of the templates in there for things like team sites make those capabilities pre-configured and ready to go. At the end of the day, a ton of people that we deal with out there today are using SharePoint, but using it to a very limited set of capabilities, really just scratching the surface of what the capabilities of SharePoint are overall. And so SharePoint and its potential is greatly underutilized to a large extent out in the marketplace today. Given the potential of what's available in SharePoint, you can get increased value over time from your SharePoint environment, but there is additional commitment, effort, and hence cost associated with doing those things. So if you look at this from kind of the bottom left up to the upper right, you know, the initial things about using it as a secure repository for your documents and as an alternative to your file share, that's very easy to do, very easy to get started, very low cost to get started with doing that. And really, users can actually adopt and get involved with that and kind of get proficient with using that type of use of the system very quickly without really much in the way of training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you go up to the next level, where we start talking about ad hoc process and collaboration, this is where we're really talking about the evolution or the use of starting using of things like team sites, you know, or maybe even project sites and things for doing some very loose collaboration on projects and other initiatives that you might have. In that regard, you start getting people involved, you start promoting doing a certain way of business, hence there's a little bit of ad hoc process added to the mix. People might assign people to things and then people can see what they've been assigned. You might even put some simple approval or participation or feedback type of workflows in place in order to do that on a one-off based upon the needs of that team and that particular site, et cetera. And once again, very low barrier to entry, easy to get started, and really good way for people to get adopted and used to the interaction and the interface and the conventions of using SharePoint for that type of purpose. Now you step up to that to that third step. You really start talking about the capabilities of really managing production processes and even maybe invoking vertical applications, whether they're ones you develop yourself internally within SharePoint or get from third parties like us. The idea here is that it starts to get a little more institutionalized and formalized. For example, the way work is done, if you have a project management process or a software development lifecycle, it starts to get formalized and try to be used consistently across all different types of projects, all different types of works and processes, so that now there really is some central thought, possibly some standards and things that you're promoting for consistent use of the solution so that you can get good value out of it, get consistent data, consistent process, et cetera. Start to do that, you really start looking at training and standards and process optimization and possibly development and other costs associated with making that happen and really having a cohesive approach being done in SharePoint within certain disciplines and functions that you want to do within the organization. And then up at the higher level, you know, you look at these things like you know, list data and other things that you put in SharePoint that may participate in those processes that you've adopted. But then there's the need possibly to grab or share data with other systems like ERP or other line of business systems places where you have more structured and formal data that may enhance, participate, or provide value or information to the rest of the process that's being done in SharePoint. When you start doing that, the integration costs, the dovetailing and the integration of processes so that things flow properly in the way that you do business within your organization requires yet another level of investment, discipline, and commitment. The idea, though, is you can achieve all these different aspects in SharePoint with the right planning, commitment, and investment. So let's talk about some SharePoint best practices. We talked about where people generally start. When they start with smaller uses or limited use of SharePoint, it's very simple to get started. But what if you're really ready to go up that ladder of capabilities, as we showed you in the prior slide? Well, you really got to start being a little bit more purposeful and proactive in the way that you're approaching this. For example, you need to start thinking about broader usage and how this is going to be architected to support it. So, for example, you have to think about what type of server farm is going to be needed to not only serve the volume of the user base and the traffic that you're going to have, but also being able to support the topography or the geographic dispersity of the people in your organization. You can also be looking at, when you start formalizing and make bigger use of SharePoint, larger volumes of data. You know, things like list data and other core components in SharePoint don't take up a lot of space, but when you start using this for content management and as a repository for all different types of things, when you start talking about highly graphical documents, possibly engineering drawings, possibly other things, CAD, other things like that that are large volumes of data, they can rapidly increase your requirements for space and storage and database capacity within the solution. So these are things that you have to think about. Are you ready for that? Also, a wide variety of data, meaning you might have different types of data in the solution, and you may have different standards and methods and processes and even workflows for those types of things. So you need to think about what data will be actually done or managed within this solution so that you can accommodate the various nuances of the requirements of those. Also, you've got to consider complexity and navigation. One of the downsides of SharePoint and the challenges that folks have come up through that free version and just turn it loose for people to do is that it starts to grow kind of organically and kind of unrestrained or in an unstructured way. Meaning at the end of the day, folks are saying, wow, we've got all these sites and people are using it, but maybe the complexity of how that has spawned and how it's spawned kind of unrestrained can have its downsides later on as far as navigation, finding things, and even understanding what's out there. So if you're going to think about a bigger use of SharePoint, you should probably put a little bit more structure and planning into how that is going to grow and try to manage that growth. Also, you want to consider customization and integration. So for example, meet the specific needs of your organization, really think about the needs for customization, but also, heed the fact that, customization can also breed limitations in other areas in the future as you upgrade and other things like that. And integration or touch points, as we talked with other systems, is something that if you're going to make a bigger use of SharePoint, is something that if you want it to be fully functional, there's probably data that's going to be shared with other existing applications or other applications you may bring on board. The other thing is to really think about how you're going to promote consistent use and adoption. The whole garbage in, garbage out philosophy of, you can put a lot of data in, but if there's not commonality of that data, if it can't be aggregated and reported on in a consistent fashion so that it's really looking at apples to apples with data elements and documents and the way you can search for them and look for them, you may get less than optimum value out of the information you're deriving out of your SharePoint. And also, by making those standards in place and giving people guidance on how to use it and really have the work being done in SharePoint, you can promote more consistent or across-the-board adoption rates of your user base out there. Because one of the things when you do things more ad hoc is you get sporadic adoption. Some people use it, some people don't. Some documents people put in, some they don't. Make it more of an elective process to get this and get the value out of that. More consistent, widespread adoption in your organization is definitely preferable. So to that end, you probably want to start if you start looking at a broader, bigger use of SharePoint, really start doing some more planning and really invoke some type of governance on how this is actually going to be rolled out, sustained, and enhanced and evolve over time. So what you really want to do is you really want to build a team to plan and govern this, and especially in the planning phase, make sure that you get a cross-organizational, cross-functional team involved so that you meet the needs and the business value that are needed by the different parts of the organization and even at different levels or tiers of people within the organization. And once you do that, you should really define a center of excellence of some type. So as you hash through these requirements and you get the standards and you put them in place, that you have this center of excellence that, what are the best practices? What is the best way to do X? What's the best way to do Y? And that way, people in your user base aren't reinventing the wheel all the time out there as they meet specific needs or business needs that they're trying to fill within their organization with this solution. I would also study the information architecture, meaning I would want to make sure that I have consistent use of the information, maybe track issues in a common way and do documents in a certain way and have certain metadata and taxonomies around that so it can make searching easy, and later on for records management and retention as you want to archive and find these things later on. Also using in 2010 the concept of content types so that you can have consistent use of ways of bringing certain types of content to the masses in a way that's consistent based upon central libraries of these types of things. And I would also want to define the technical architecture. We talked about that a little earlier in the slide, but want to make sure that based upon the intended use of the system, the user base, the geographic dispersity, and possibly the diverse business needs of different business units or departments in the organization, define a technical architecture that supports that. One of the nice parts about SharePoint is it's highly scalable in a server architecture. It's flexible and modular in the way that you deploy it. So the idea is there's considerations on the best way to meet the needs of your specific organization. We talked about considering user navigation so that you want to have some method to the madness to make sure that there's good, easy ways and methods and a structure so that people can actually find things easily and know how things are stored and architected within the SharePoint environment. The key thing is to get people who are good at this, who are motivated, and who are going to bring good ideas and input into the process early so that you get good adoption and you can show that that it can be done, and also really get the people and the thought leaders in this who are going to help evolve it and help it put its best foot forward. One of the ways to achieve governance within these solutions is to really not let people, and a lot of organizations are doing this now, just ad hoc or willy-nilly create sites just for any particular purpose. One of the downsides of that is a lot of organizations have, so many sites out there they're not even aware of what they're out there for, or if they're out there, or if they're active or inactive. And folks may just put out sites to try something out and leave them, and they just sit. And this inventory of sites just grows and grows and grows. So a lot of organizations have kind of made the move on the governance side to kind of promote ways to put some controls around sites that will be created and how they'll be created and what the content is and what the templates that should be used are, etc. So one simple way to do this is to implement, even via SharePoint, a simple request form. It could be a simple SharePoint list, or it could be a form that is created for that list. But the idea is simple questions like this should be asked before a site is created. What is the nature of the site? What's it going to be used for? Who owns the site? What type of data will be stored in this? Will some of the data later become a record from a records retention perspective that needs to be archived and put into some structured retention process? How many versions of the data should be kept? Things like documents and other things. What's the expected lifespan of that site? When should we expect to retire it? Who should have access to the site? What kind of permissions? Will there be workflows needed? If so, what kind and how complex? Is there a need for imaging? Do we need to have a way to get and scan and get hard copy documents imaged and put into the system and properly log, catalog, and metadata around that for proper classification? And also, is external collaboration required? One of the key things that we see out there is a lot of companies now are using external partners and contractors and collaborators from outside their organization, and how are we going to meet the needs to get the proper access and participation by those external parties. The use of extranets and putting some type of access for these things outside of the DMZ within an organization is something that should be considered if that's a requirement for the particular site that you're using. This is by no means exhaustive. It's just an exhaustive list, but some things that you should consider. So when you plan and optimize, you want to think about scalability. There's what you have today. But what we've seen is as things start with the SharePoint and as you have success, it can rapidly grow. So the idea is not just to plan for today, but plan and optimize what you're doing for scalability. And as I mentioned, SharePoint is a very scalable architecture. You can add more database stores. You can add more application servers, web front ends. You can have different farms for different locations and things like that. But the idea is, look at your storage needs, mostly look at your document volumes and the sizes. Look at the topology. Is it strictly going to be internally within a LAN here locally, or is it going to be over a WAN, and do you have to accommodate the traffic and possibly the performance in that WAN? Also, site collections. The concept of site collections in SharePoint is really a collection of sites. And there are limitations and recommendations by Microsoft on how many sites should be in a particular site collection, something like 5,000 sites. And if you have many business units in a large organization, it may be preferable to have multiple site collections, maybe organized by business unit or whatever it might be, and potentially be able to federate and roll up that data for reporting and other purposes within the organization. And from a global deployment perspective, having a central farm in one location in one country may not be the answer. You may want to have multiple farms and maybe do some type of replication in order to meet the needs and the performance needs and the access levels of the folks that you're trying to serve. So just a little something to consider out there based upon the growth of SharePoint and the deployment and rollout and evolution of it in your organization. So some recommendations. One of the things that's out there, SharePoint has a lot of good core capabilities and tools and technologies within the core product itself. And depending on the tier of SharePoint you buy, whether it's the free foundation version, whether it's SharePoint Server Standard, or the enterprise level of SharePoint Server that is kind of like the Cadillac version of it, there's still things that it could do better, and there's a whole cottage industry or a whole ecosystem of partners out there that have developed and provide services in order to fill those gaps and do the things that it needs to do. So there are I'm not going to identify or start to tout different vendors here, but some of the things that people often fill the gaps with third parties is to have enhanced management tools, ways to manage things like in an enhanced way, like managing things like permissions and things to manage other aspects of the administrative nature of not only the back end of SharePoint, but also getting it out to the users. Also replication. Third-party tools are generally needed to do a good job of replicating data across multiple farms, across different servers and things like that. So those are things that people often use. As you look at the WAN, SharePoint can transmit a lot of data over a long distance based upon the size of the documents and things like that. So things like acceleration for WANs and other things that can be done to optimize those things are tools that are provided by third-party vendors. Also content migration, from when you're looking at using other methods or other tools maybe prior that you've used for content or enterprise content management, you may want to get that data into SharePoint. You can do it natively in SharePoint, but some tools are out there by third parties that streamline that process and make it a much more robust process for getting data from one tool to another. Also backup and archiving. There's basic backup capabilities within SharePoint, but the idea of enhancing that backup, making that backup more intelligent, and then providing a good archiving scheme so that your active database doesn't just keep growing and growing and growing, is things that good third-party tools can actually enhance. SharePoint actually has built-in workflow capability. Windows Workflow Foundation is really the core underlying workflow technology that's in SharePoint. And you can build very simple, actually you can use templates that are already built. You can build simple workflows using SharePoint Designer with kind of a drag and drop, not really writing any code. And you can do very complex workflows using Visual Studio with people that actually know how to write some code. But there's also third-party tools out there that allow you to do very advanced workflows in more of a GUI interface and allow you to do more complex workflows and tracking and management of those workflows. And so those things are available that are out there that support SharePoint. And other things like social extensions to make it more Facebook or social media-like. Secure extranet tools so that you can actually make this thing available to outside parties like we were talking about earlier on. And just overall, just vendors that have vertical applications. We're one of those people that provide vertical applications that allow you to extend the use of SharePoint, provide capabilities to provide application functionality within there without you having to write the custom code or have somebody write custom applications for you. Really, they can be bought as commercial, off-the-shelf applications that can be deployed and plugged into your SharePoint right away, saving you a lot of cost, effort, and mostly the maintenance of that code over time as you go through different iterations and upgrades of SharePoint. So from a deployment and integration perspective, some additional recommendations is that SharePoint may not be the best tool for everything you're doing in your organization, so you should clearly delineate where SharePoint should or should not be used, where the organization thinks SharePoint is going to add value, and where truly they think you should use something else instead of SharePoint to do certain tasks or do certain functions in your processes within your organization. If you're coming from other tools that have the data, I would say really look at migrating only the content that is truly needed. Migration of content is sometimes not easy, depending on the nature of the content. It can sometimes be costly and time-consuming. And oftentimes a point-forward solution with maybe migrating only things that are carried forward or in transition or in progress right now, and until you ultimately put everything that's new in your SharePoint environment. But just think about migrating the things that truly make sense to do so. And archive from the older system the things that make sense to do so. And also structure it in a way where you do have one version of the truth. You don't want to still end up going to SharePoint and have different copies of documents all the way around. One thing about version control, you can have one document, one source of a particular document or piece of or artifact. And then as you modify it, you can actually have it do version tracking and actually store versions of that one document as you incrementally change, allowing you to look at older versions of the software or roll back a document to another version. And then when you want to share the contents of that document, instead of sending the whole volume of that document, to be able to send a link to the location of that document where somebody can then, on whatever rights you give them, look at that document or participate in the evolution of that document is definitely more cost-effective, space-effective, and decreases the reliance on email for such things. And then, as I mentioned, consider customizations carefully. As you customize things, truly look at how needed they are and how integral they are to what you really need to achieve, because customization can often provide barriers when you do the future upgrades. And Microsoft's SharePoint technology will evolve. You know, we had a lot of customers go from a 2007 to a 2010 upgrade, from the 2003 version up to the 2007 version. And they've gotten easier over time. But customizations are things that sometimes create some complications in those things that need to be considered. So make sure they provide the right value for the pain level you might have on those customizations. So overall recommendations, develop a content management, and this is early, you might want to think of these things. Develop a content management strategy before deploying. Don't just put the technology up and then try to figure it out as you go. Try to pre-think your content in there and what's that strategy you're going to use around that, and make SharePoint part of that strategy rather than deploy SharePoint and then just try to bolt on content management. Plan and set guidelines for your SharePoint usage. We alluded to that earlier. Display some email use. If you're going to put your content in there, quit emailing the documents around and use SharePoint for collaboration and try and indoctrinate that into your culture. Architect and flexibility for growth, for flexibility and growth like we talked about earlier on. Longer-term considerations is focus on people and behavior. If you're going to want adoption, if you don't get adoption, you don't get the benefits. So the idea is focus on people, their behavior, the way they do work, and the processes they're trying to work within. And make sure you fit the tool to the processes rather than the other way around. I would also create a SharePoint development or service group that can serve the needs of your group out there and also provide guidance, direction, and vision as to where the SharePoint deployment should go. Also, so you don't end up with all these orphaned, inactive sites out there, you might want to maintain a good inventory of all sites and repositories and ID the owners or identify the owners of those sites and the purposes that they're out there and whether or not they're needed or whether they can be gotten rid of, for example, at a certain period of time. Set policies on team sites and the documents that would be within them. Also, if you're going to promote standards, really build a library of purpose-specific templates, whether they be workspace templates, document templates, and content types and things like that, as well as a library of accepted third-party add-ons that people can use for various purposes so that you have some control over that, and then making sure that the things that are being incorporated into your environment are quality developments. And then identify any SharePoint dependencies you have with other applications, because if they're either immediate dependencies that have to be done or ones that you can foresee down the road, you'd want to architect the system to accommodate that in a way that makes the most sense. So anyway, that's kind of some ideas about SharePoint, how people are using it today, where SharePoint can go, and things that really need to be considered. A lot of folks have learned the hard way doing trial and error through this, but with a little planning and foresight, you can really have a very successful and very robust SharePoint deployment. Well, let's talk about now extending SharePoint, getting more value out of SharePoint. And in our case, we're going to talk about using it for IT planning and control, for projects, products/applications, and services. The business value proposition that's here that EPM Live brings and really promotes is that there's no need in a lot of cases to have separate standalone and oftentimes expensive applications to do specific functions. The advent of SharePoint really provides a flexible platform where a lot of things can be done within a common environment and in a common repository. So if we do that, if we can actually do certain functions that have dedicated standalone applications that have to be paid for, maintained, and upgraded over time, we can actually generate increased value from our investment in SharePoint. If we've decided that we're going to go SharePoint from a collaboration route and as a platform, why not get more value out of our investment in SharePoint incrementally than having to stand up and maintain a whole separate technology or a whole separate solution? It also increases efficiencies by workers. So if we actually get more and more into the SharePoint environment from that perspective, then a user, a worker who has to participate in various work streams or various work types does not have to monitor and go to 3, 4, and I've seen people go to 5 applications in order to get their total workload and participate in all the work that they're looking at. By centralizing it and giving them one forum for that, it makes it more efficient for your workers to get work done. Also, the other part of the value proposition is the more we can fold into our SharePoint strategy, we then get presented with the opportunity to potentially retire multiple solutions that can be handled in one SharePoint environment. The nice part is there's a lot of standalone applications that have very hefty maintenance and ongoing annual costs. If we can get rid of those and retire those and involve them into SharePoint, there's a real economic benefit potentially that can be had that can help pay for actually rolling that stuff into SharePoint. So from our perspective, work is everywhere, whether it's IT or other parts of the organization. You know, people are working on projects and they have project tasks. They are getting action items or to-dos. There's getting issues that are raised that they have to follow up and resolve. There's defects, there's incidents, there's change requests, there's bugs, there's other deliverables. And then in a more of an agile world, there's user stories and defects and things like that. The idea is that if you're going to look at the totality of work in an IT organization, there's some resources that get hit with some or all of these things as part of their workload and that they have to manage across the organization. And the organization needs to manage the resources and the capacity of their resources to do this work across all this work. The sad reality is today that this is mostly done through disconnected systems and processes. If you look at this, you know, you have work is being managed by parallel and separate processes, so they might have a service request system for things like requests and incidents and tickets. You know, application management for things like agile development are separate and standalone typically, and they're managing their user stories and their defects and their iterations and their sprints and those types of things, and managing the life cycles of their applications. And then there's traditional project management applications where people are building plans and schedules, a la Microsoft Project, and other things where tasks are being done and issues and change requests are being done. So you end up with different applications to manage. You have different data silos of information or different data sources that people have to go to participate in all these processes. And it also requires multiple entry points for the work that's associated with all this. And this is the reality of what's out there today. So with EPM Live and our WorkEngine solution, one of the things that we have is the ability to roll all this into a common SharePoint platform. So for example, based on that SharePoint platform, we have all the different types of work elements we talked about, of all these different work types and templates for those that give you a great starting point, and that but also can be modified with simple SharePoint skill sets to get to make this as broad or as narrow a definition of work as you want to make it within this solution. We also have pre-built applications and templates for doing traditional project management and portfolio management. Application management, meaning managing the life cycle of the application as well as the development associated with those applications or products. And then tools for service management for that kind of unplanned operational type of work, the things that come in for break fix or service requests and other things. The idea is that as all this workload comes in, it's really the demand management and the capture of all this, all these different types of work, gives us a real good view on the work demand, and also seeing how that maps to the capacity of our organization and the resources we have to be able to perform that work. And WorkEngine, outside of what SharePoint does out of the box, at the enterprise level provides good roll-up visibility on an automated basis. You don't have to go on a workspace by workspace basis to see portfolios of work and applications and projects and other things. From a resource management perspective, to see the totality of the workload, no matter what type of work it is. And so I can see whether or not I'm over or underloaded, or my department is over or underloaded. We can do cost and budgeting. We have schedule management. We can actually have our own SharePoint-based online schedule tool that does kind of all the basics of what a Microsoft project does. Or we integrate with Microsoft Project to get that data into SharePoint. From a work management perspective, you can actually have a resource go to one place to see their entire workload. I can go to one place to see what's been assigned to me, no matter what type of work it is, and use that same form to feedback completion status and information about my work on that particular assignment. And also built-in time reporting to do those types of things. We talked about how SharePoint can use some help in some areas regarding administration and other things. WorkEngine from an enterprise perspective also provides additional administrative capabilities, like a sync tool to be able to propagate retroactive changes to workspaces and lists and other things like that. Things like enhanced notifications engine to step up the native alerts capability within SharePoint, just to name a few examples. And in this total work message that WorkEngine has, we don't have to own or be the source of it all. If you look at the bottom, we have built automated integrations or pre-built integrations with other systems for things like Project and Project Server, for help desk systems like BMC, Remedy, other tools, TFS, to get workload that's generated from those into WorkEngine so we can get visibility into how that complements and adds to all the other work that might be being generated in WorkEngine, so we can look at a total workload within the solution. I think one of the values that we're providing is we're not this separate application. There's many applications out there that say, we integrate with SharePoint. We don't just integrate with SharePoint. We are part of SharePoint. We are a SharePoint-based application that really is just leveraging SharePoint capabilities and technology in a very specific set of ways. If you look at the big blue box here as the SharePoint platform, and you look at the green boxes as kind of the broad capabilities, say, that SharePoint brings to the table, we're leveraging that platform and these capabilities in very specific ways to bring you work planning, resource planning, portfolio management, time management, all those types of things around that. and also leveraging out-of-the-box integrations that, if you look at the top, that SharePoint has with other tools. But we also have our own that even enhance that further and extend the integration with other tools that are out there, Microsoft and non-Microsoft alike. So the key, you can actually manage in SharePoint now with EPM Live in our WorkEngine tool set, the end-to-end project and work management story. If you really think about demand management intake from requests and ideas all the way through portfolio visibility or prioritization and selecting of that work, all the way through coming through that funnel and having some of it be maybe project work in nature, more application or product work in nature, or even more operational work in nature. All that work can now be managed and executed and collaborated on to successful completion within SharePoint and EPM Live's WorkEngine technology. Net result is the analytics, the reporting, the dashboards, all of that becomes a more natural output of the process because we now have all this, what was once disparate data, and siloed information in a common repository that we can report on very, very easily without a lot of manual churn, which we often see happen today. Another key thing that SharePoint really is not one of its core strengths is really providing resource management. If you think about assigning work to people and having list items and maybe assigning list items and having owners of things in there, it doesn't really aggregate it all. And if you think about resource management from the top down strategically, from capacity planning all the way down through resource task management and really collaboration of that resource information across all of a solution or all of a work process, we really add a lot of the resource management capabilities so that you can really use SharePoint as a resource management component to managing your work and your processes, and we hope to show you some of that. The key is WorkEngine will have you have all work together. One intake, one funnel for demand, whether they be service requests or incidents, change requests, projects, application work. That demand's going to come in, and depending on what type of work it is, you can put it through the different areas of the solution or work streams and the appropriate processes for each of those so that we can go through the life cycle of all this different work within a common funnel and a common governance and work structure. So it could be a service portfolio of service management work, application-related work, and project or traditional waterfall type project work. So from a WorkEngine execution overview, for example, you can have service management, application management, and project and portfolio management all happening under the WorkEngine umbrella. But WorkEngine is going to provide built-in roll-up visibility to all the data of all those different types, whether it be dashboards, whether it be portfolios, whether it be reporting. So we can actually mine and leverage that information in a way that helps us make decisions and keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in our organization. So from a demand management perspective, we can provide a central place where you can put any type of request in, whether it be a project request, whether it be a change request, an incident or a service request, maybe submit a new application or a new idea or a user story or a backlog item for a particular product. The idea, no matter what type of request it is, you can have one funnel that, depending on the nature of the type of request it is, can go through a different or varied work stream depending on the nature of the work or maybe even the size and complexity of the work, and then route those requests to the appropriate people for approval and triage. So from a service management perspective, very large organizations often have maybe a service desk implementation already in there, but there's a lot of organizations, mid-size and smaller as well, who don't necessarily have something entrenched. There's an opportunity here for folks that do have it entrenched to bring that workload into WorkEngine so we can analyze it in relation to all the other work that's being managed in WorkEngine and look at total workload. But also we have the tools to help you actually initiate these service requests and execute on those service requests, leveraging the SharePoint and WorkEngine technology. So the idea of having requesters going in and make service requests via email or phone or web, and then be able to have that request get generated, assigned to a team member, and then get resolved and work on in a more operational nature for this unplanned work is something that's all very possible with the tools that we provide, the SharePoint capabilities and the workflows that can be used to augment and enhance that process. But most of the main things that you would see in, say, a dedicated help desk for service management feature can be enabled, and we've enabled all these things within SharePoint. So the idea is that this whole concept of not needing a standalone solution in many cases for the type of service management things you'd like to do are all provided by EPM Live in a SharePoint environment. So the service requests, being able to make those and have an inventory of all these service requests at your fingertips, and having a visible portfolio of that, and having assignments and tracking of that in one place. Even things around service management, like managing your service level agreements that you have with internal or external customers and understanding what your agreement is regarding response times and other metrics around your SLAs. Being able to look at account services metrics, so if you have internal customers you have agreements with, or external customers or clients, and whatever your contracts are, look at things like on your contracts, how are we tracking against our contract obligations? These are metrics that can be kept within WorkEngine, within your SharePoint environment. From an application portfolio perspective, you can start managing your applications and or products and really start looking at this from an application portfolio management perspective, but also within items in that application portfolio. Start managing development, looking at release management, managing the backlog that comes in against those applications, and really plan on managing those in more of an agile Scrum type of approach. And also as part of that, really plan and capture your test cases and other things like that around the process. In this regard, you could have a list or a portfolio of applications and even break that down to where you have full workspaces that manage everything or actually capture everything about that application, like the nature of that application. Maybe have the life cycle managed, planning things like it's your upgrade plans and retirement plans for that, and other things around that that you capture. Anything around that application that you want to store from a knowledge perspective can be captured within these workspaces. And then the idea is that you can spawn projects and other development efforts that are related to these applications and do them in either as traditional projects or agile projects, whatever it might be. And any of the things from an application management perspective that you might buy a standalone technology for can now be actuated and enabled within SharePoint using EPM Live's tools and WorkEngine. Also, a key thing that's often asked for in this area is TFS integration from Microsoft. A lot of folks are managing workload in there and creating projects and project collections. That workload can actually be brought over to us for not only analysis, but possibly having people work with that data over in our solution and bring that information and resulting updates back to TFS. So we can have a total application portfolio, so as we're managing applications within our organization, we can have easy visibility into the list of applications and be able to drill into those and look at the roadmap, lifecycle, and other information around those applications. We can start managing things like costs, start planning our priorities as far as managing and updating and putting effort towards these applications. We can have, as I said, specific application workspaces that manage backlogs and releases and other aspects of these applications, even maintenance. We have agile planning tools where you can capture for a particular product. You can plan iterations or sprints within your releases and then actually incorporate via drag and drop the sizing of user stories and defects and features that you want to make part of these. So this interactive planner is something that we interject into SharePoint so that you can do all this stuff right within that SharePoint environment. And once again, we could actually incorporate that backlog from TFS items. From a traditional project portfolio management perspective, that's another type of request that could come in for traditional projects where we're managing tasks and issues and risks and changes and action items and other things like that. And you can have a variety of different types of project methodologies. You might have some that you manage, we're using a construction-oriented type of discipline, some that you might be using maybe a more product development discipline, or other types of methodologies that you might use. The idea is they can all be accommodated, but yet roll up common elements on progress, status, dates of completion, and milestones and other metrics, all up to a central location from a portfolio perspective, dashboards like you see up top here, or even just overall reporting. And just like the other aspects, any of the project management features that you would expect to see in a standalone project or portfolio management solution are now enabled within SharePoint with EPM Live and WorkEngine. So once again, project workspaces are workspace templates that you can invoke very quickly that have the content that you need and the facilities that you need to manage tasks and schedules, resources, issues, risks, change requests, other list items like lessons learned or whatever it might be, and also have the collaborative things like document libraries for the document artifacts around this project or deliverables, discussion threads, and other things that you might want around that. All ready to go out of the box from EPM Live, but modifiable and tailorable by you with normal SharePoint skill sets. We add a scheduling tool to SharePoint, meaning you can use Microsoft Project if you want, because we have a bidirectional integration with that that's very common out there. But our online project planner allows you to do all the basics, build a work breakdown structure, add tasks, dates and durations, add resource assignments, dependencies, all those types of things that you do that 90% of the folks do can be done right within SharePoint without ever leaving the web browser. So this is something that's added from a value perspective. And then the resource management piece, as you gain visibility into all the resources across the work that you're working on, we actually maintain a central resource pool within SharePoint and allow you to look at a resource or a group of resources and see, based upon what's assigned to them, whether it be different, no matter what type of work it is, seeing how that impacts their capacity line and see if they're over or under taxed at any given point in time. And we have all kinds of reporting around this as well to get more granular as you like. From a portfolio management perspective, we can always look at a ready-to-go, automated, based on real-time data, portfolio indices regarding prioritization, tracking active portfolio items, looking at doing what-if modeling, capacity planning, and other things around that portfolio. So things like cost and budgeting, being able to use detailed cost budgets to be able to plan on a very line-item basis what the budgets are and what the cost types that we're going to have and cost categories we're going to have to track to. And be able to do that in a very robust fashion, as well as resource capacity planning to see, based upon what we think we're going to do in the future with proposed projects as well as with our active projects, do we have the bandwidth to tackle this, or do we have to prioritize or stage our projects and sequence our projects differently in order to do it all? And that what-if modeling allows you to examine those trade-offs by deselecting projects or moving projects out in time to see if they fit, if you look down below at the heat map, where you can remove over-allocations or under-capacity situations that you have based upon your plan. The key here is that I think the real value is, you could do any one of those individual areas, service, applications, and projects, but the idea of the power is really doing it all together and getting that common visibility and reporting. So the idea is to have this all roll up no matter what type of work it is. To leverage our templates as a basis. Now you can always put your own spin or tweaks on these things, but the idea, whether you're using a traditional PMI, PMBOK methodology, Agile Scrum, or other methodologies that you're using in workspace templates, these are all things that are available to you out of the box and get going very quickly with rapid deployment. From a resource management perspective, all work, and look at all workloading, be able to quantify and see that across all the different work efforts that you have. Manage all the different types of work so a resource can manage all their work items in one place. So this is an example of a My Work page where a resource would actually go and see their entire workload and actually be able to edit any of these and status them with completion and notes and other things like that without having to go all over the place or into a variety of different applications. The idea of time reporting. If an organization wants to capture hours against these work items or projects, that's built into the system, and it's a capability that's a native default that just needs to be enabled. And just the overall collaboration tools that are in SharePoint, we're leveraging those in very specific ways to enhance the collaborative way that that work is done. Whether it be social networking, change management, and workflows and templates, these are things that are all enhanced. And really, SharePoint at the core makes this possible. We've just leveraged it in a way that makes it specific to work management, project management, and application management. And we talked about the reporting. There's so many different ways to surface data and report on data in SharePoint. We're leveraging charting web parts that we've developed that you can actually configure without writing code, so that you could actually have charts like this with virtually the same kind of effort it would take to build a chart in Excel. We have a library of SQL reporting services reports that allow you to report on all different dimensions of the work and projects that are in there. Dashboards and reporting, time phase data, and snapshot reporting, these are things that we add to the mix. Went through most of the concepts here, and I think in the little time that we have left, I just thought I'd go in and show a little bit of what this looks like live. By the way, feel free to reach out and contact us if you want us to set up a full function demonstration for you online. Happy to do that. Also on our website at epmlog.com, we have some recorded demonstrations of all these different things I'm going to show you here that you can actually leverage on demand and do at your own pace. But essentially, you come into SharePoint here like any other SharePoint user with our application. And I'm authenticated in here as this person, Steve Masters, and this home page gives me a lot of information. One, it gives me some information about announcements that I need to be aware of. It also gives me ready access to the active projects that I am a member of or an owner of, so I don't have to go searching around for those. So like in SharePoint, I wouldn't have to keep links to my specific projects that I'm a member of, and also have to figure out the URLs or shortcuts to those. I've got quick hyperlink access and quick snapshot status of how those projects are doing. I also have a part that has my work. So the idea, whether it be service requests or issues or project tasks, whatever it might be, no matter how many projects or non-project work it is, I'm getting that all in one place and updatable in that singular place. I can create new items from here. So in one place on my home page, I can go here and I create a new project, a new issue, a new change request, a new action item, service request, whatever it might be. I have one central place. I don't have to go into a specific workspace to go all make that happen. I can do all this really centrally from my own home page. Okay. And then if I'm going to have the ability or the permission to create new projects, I can go in here and create a new project anytime I like. We provide either online with a robust library, or you can create from that in your own a local gallery of a bunch of templates of different workspace project templates or non-project templates that you want to create new efforts within this work-oriented solution. So for example, by selecting a template, giving the project a name and saying create, it's going to add a workspace with all of the feature sets that we talked about in the slides, and possibly even content in your standards, like your document standards and other things that you might want, already pre-populated into those templates. And you can have as many versions in here of these templates as you want to describe the different varieties of projects that you might have. Once you get projects in there, the Project Center really provides you with a portfolio of all your projects. And you can have as many different views of this as you want. The difference is, instead of this being a list, this is a component of EPM Lives that actually crawls your workspaces and grabs this data and renders it here at a summary or enterprise level. And then you can use normal SharePoint views parameters to have different views showing different columns of data, et cetera, et cetera. But just as an example in here, the idea, you have different types of projects in here. For example, the Strategic Merger Evaluation project is a more waterfall project that was planned and scheduled using our online work planner. This PC tablet software is a application that actually is managed in more of an Agile Scrum methodology. And the idea is that you can go to any one of those at any given point in time and go down to, say, the details of this specific project. This project space was actually built via a template that was selected, and then managing things like the overall tasks and details of this project and looking at the overall schedule, and be able to go into that schedule and plan it with an online work planner that's very easy to use. So for example, if I wanted to edit the plan for this, this one was used using waterfall planning technology with our online work planner. So as it loads the file, all of the basics that you would do in Microsoft Project, being able to make a task list, indent and outdent the task to create a work breakdown structure, for example. The idea here of being able to build an online plan, indent and outdent your tasks, be able to put milestone items in here, being able to put dependencies of all types in here, being able to assign resources, for example, of various type, putting workloads and resource assignments and assign them based upon project teams that are basically being put together from your central resource pool. All of the basics that you would do in Microsoft Project are being done here, and then the resultant information is published and made available for SharePoint. The idea your project manager may be the only one who has to use this tool. Everyone else can then go monitor the schedule from a simple SharePoint page with the task list that I showed you. Be able to manage things like issues and risks and change requests and action items, and have libraries for documents and discussion threads, etc. Let me navigate back up to the summaries level. And you might go in and look at another project that's more agile in nature. So if I go to the Project Center, I can go look at, say, that's PC Tablet software project. And notice if I go on to the details of that, the workspace template that was used was different because we're using a different methodology. In this case, notice that we have requests, which can be requests that people have put in to have things get into the backlog. You have a full backlog of items that you can actually manage in here, so you can actually capture backlog, user stories, defects, requests, whatever it might be, and you can even plan out iterations and sprints and actually quantify the iterations on their time box, the estimated points or hours that are needed for that. And then you can actually go into this iteration, for example, and you can do detail planning. In this case, this would be using our Agile Planner. So you're not doing waterfall planning technology or methodology. You're actually looking at the iterations and sprints that were planned, and then you start looking at things like user stories and things in the backlog that you might want to add to a specific iteration. So for example, notice I have a points capacity here that was actually leveraged of 60 points. And I look at the points that are estimated on particular backlog items, for example. I can drag and drop those elements onto a specific iteration and now decrement from that actual iteration and actually plan that user story and even break that user story down into subordinate tasks to define that in more detail, maybe even assign them to different people within that organization. So the key here is doing different planning methodology in a more iterative, agile Scrum type of methodology. From a service request perspective, you could either do this from your home page or a central log, but if we go back up to the top, we can look at a service center that actually has all different types of work in it. So for example, the service requests from the service center might be a list of service requests which are more unplanned in nature. They come in from the user base based upon things that break or issues that come up or things that need to be worked on. And the idea that these can all be triaged and put into place. Now, think about this. You've got project tasks, agile backlog items, you've got service requests. If I go into the Resource Center now and I want to look at assignments or workload across all of that, and let's just say I'm interested in my, my star resource, Adam Barr. If I want to look at his resource plan across all of this information, EPM Live and WorkEngine are going to crawl across all that workload and find everywhere that Adam is assigned to work, and then give me a picture of what that really means based upon what we've put on his plate. Notice he's got severe overallocation in some of these time areas, and it's based upon the fact that he's got service requests, tasks, issues, backlog items from Agile development all the way through. And this picture allows me to see where he's at and also maybe even do some what-if analysis to see if maybe I can backfill or change the time phasing or stretch out work in here to see if I can work with this and find resolution, or possibly even open up the item and assign someone else. If a resource then wants to update their work, they have their My Work or their My Timesheet where they can go into one central place. And here, this is for me, Steve Masters, the fictional character, and I can see everything that's been on my plate, and I can actually either complete them through a simple checkbox or light up the road to edit that information on completion status, etc., all in one place. I know we've run over on time. I would just say that in our report center, we can run all types of reporting, list reports and roll-ups. Our reports will actually roll up data from all across the organization, For example, if I was going to look at individual projects and I wanted to look at all open backlog items, our reports and things will actually aggregate that information from wherever it resides in our SharePoint solution, and then basically show me all the backlog items that are out there. If it's traditional waterfall project, I can see all the milestones or key milestones across all projects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As I said, please contact us if you want to see a more detailed demonstration. I would like to close by saying thank you for joining us today. If you want to learn more, go visit our website at epmlive.com. What we were showing you today was mostly built around our WorkEngine product, but feel free to explore any of those. You can actually learn more about WorkEngine, see recorded demos, or you can even request a free trial environment so you can get hands-on with this yourself. Please remember that the solutions that we showed you today are available to you either in a more of an online SaaS or hosted model, so you can get it online very quickly with pre-built solutions and get started almost immediately, or we offer them as a licensed solution that you can install right into your SharePoint farm as SharePoint solutions and features that deploy very, very quickly and just really enhance your own SharePoint environment. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time. My apologies for running over. But please feel free and contact us from our website if you have other things that you'd like us to explore or questions specific to you you'd like us to answer. Have a great day, and thank you again for your time.